It's now been 1 week since the arrest of Sean Diddy Combs.
Diddy is now at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, a place that's been described as hell on earth.
The Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn has seen multiple deaths in recent years.
The recently released film indicates that Diddy is having the worst time of his life in jail. Who knew the biggest rap mogul would live in such conditions? It appears that everything Diddy did to others is coming back to haunt him. Diddy's predicament is the same. When others suffered, he chuckled. Is it time for him to repay them? Is Puff really deserving of the harsh living circumstances? Pay attention to the end as we reveal the jail's dark secrets and Diddy's potential lifelong confinement. Is he really guilty of the crimes for which he has been charged, or is this all a setup to bring down the legend? Puff was arrested a few days ago on charges of physical violence and human trafficking. It is alleged that Puff used his power and influence to use women and satisfy his sexual desires. Additionally, to protect his reputation, people connected to him have been accused of establishing a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in trafficking, among other crimes. The news of Puff's arrest and the abhorrent and horrifying conditions he has been forced to live in has left his fans completely shaken. Arson, abduction, and forced labor. When someone is accustomed to comfort and luxury, a little discomfort can have a bigger impact than bribery and obstruction of justice. However, in Diddy's case, the change isn't minor, rather. The circumstances are deemed cruel because when he wakes up, he's staring at white walls painted with cinder blocks rather than whatever the interior design of his mansions may have been. Michael Cohen, a former fixer for President Donald Trump, said CNN Cohen has served time in jail and is aware of. According to what I've been told, it's like being there. The food is inedible. The summers are extremely hot at times, and the winters are freezing. The toilet water has been known to freeze, and it's violent. Someone like Mr. CS, for example, might be a target for certain things, and we can't allow that to happen. Surprise, surprise, Diddy's prison room tour isn't your mansion. Diddy is in prison after spending the previous 20 years floating on Cloud 9. He must now return to Earth. Cold turkey. Diddy's legal team, unprepared to leave the rapper in Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center, asked the court to transfer him to Essex County. However, their request was denied, according to a court document that All Hip Hop Agniphilo was able to obtain. It stated that at this time, the council has not asked the court to take any action, and the bail application was also denied. The producer of Bad Boy Records is being watched at all times. Was also put on suicide watch, so Puff's only choice is to wait for his trial. When the attorneys decided that the Metropolitan Prison Center was unsuitable for Puff's imprisonment, they used the judge's remarks and recent jail problems to support their request to move the detention facility. According to Mark Agelo, Puff's attorney, the producer has been housed in MDC's special housing unit, which offers the inmate more protection. However, the attorney claims that this has complicated the trial preparations. Judges have also voiced concerns about the legal team, pressing the Bureau of Prisons for status updates and pleading with the agency to make corrections. One judge even refused to send some of the defendants to jail for the time being, stating that it is up to the Bureau of Prisons to decide. Based on an argument, the lawyer asked for a change in Puff's detention location, but the judge refused, adding that footage of Diddy's arrest went viral and shows Diddy wearing a black coat. In this video, Sean Diddy Combs is seen entering the Park Hyatt Hotel in Midtown Manhattan with other men. When Homeland Security investigation agents approach and separate him, they place Combs under arrest and lead him out the front door in handcuffs. Puff was accompanied by his group of several men when he entered the lobby of the Park Hyatt Hotel in New York, but as soon as he did, law enforcement jumped on him, separating him from his friends. Anticipating the arrival of federal agents at his hotel, the people who accompanied him were seen in a state of shock, unsure of what had happened and what to do next. The rat mogul himself was shocked by what was happening, and when he reappeared on camera, he was no longer afraid and was now cuffed behind his back. The authorities then escorted him out of the hotel's main gate, and the pedestrians watched a video that had been taken just before the arrest, which showed how much fun he was having with his. He was seen chatting with fans and having a good time with his music pals. Mark reaffirmed Diddy's disappointment with the U.S. Attorney's Office's choice to pursue what we perceive to be an unfair prosecution of Mr. Combs. Mark told the court how he established his empire through hard work and strived to improve the lot of the black community. Over the last 30 years, Sean Diddy Combs, a well-known musician, self-made businessman, devoted family man, and established philanthropist, has built an empire while loving his kids and working. To improve the black community, the statement said that while he is not a criminal, he is a flawed person. It also mentioned that, despite his cooperation with the police in the ongoing investigation, the court nonetheless deemed him dangerous and denied his plea for release. MDC, the Bureau of Prisons, opened in Brooklyn in the early 1990s, and its primary function is post-arrest detention for those awaiting trial in Manhattan and Brooklyn courts. Other detainees include offenders serving brief terms. The Manhattan Brooklyn's project continued to operate despite the crumbling center's closure in 2021, but many of the facilities are literally collapsing. According to a recent report by the Justice Department Inspector General, all 123 federal bureau prison facilities need maintenance, with some desperately needing upgrades. People who have been incarcerated have voiced their displeasure with the jail's appalling circumstances, shedding light on the problems of violence, staff shortages, and extensive drug smuggling, in which the staff members are apparently. Moreover, the jail isn't seen to be secure enough for the prisoners. La told the New York Times that his client was simply a victim of an overcrowded, understaffed, and neglected federal jail that is hell on earth. How can the jail be a safe place for the inmates when the employees aren't clean? In the last 5 years, at least 6 of the center's employees have committed suicide. Uriel White was stabbed to death in June, and Edwin Cordo died after a fight a month later. 4 other people have also committed suicide in the last 3 years. Been convicted of offenses. Accepting bribes and supplying illegal goods, such as cell phones, cigarettes, and cocaine, were among the offenses. A 2021 search of a federal prison in Atlanta turned up 705 mobile phones, some concealed in walls, 134 inmate-made weapons, marijuana, methamphetamine, and enough prescription medications to fill 2 one-gallon sacks. Judges and advocates have pointed up the prison's hazardous, savage circumstances and condemned the Bureau of Prisons for them. The circumstances are so dire that some judges have allegedly avoided sending prisoners to the center, and if they were sent, their sentences were lowered. For example, in January, a U.S. district judge for Foreman permitted Gustavo Chavez to remain free on bail while he awaited his sentencing for drug-related charges. Prosecutors no longer even argued, let alone denied, that the current situation is intolerable. Judge Gary Brown notified the Bureau in August that Furman's list was still in effect. The closure of the Metropolitan Correctional Center MCC in New York City in 2021 marked a significant moment in the ongoing struggle to address the dire conditions within federal detention facilities across the United States. For years, the MCC had been plagued by a host of critical issues, ranging from poor security measures and chronic staff shortages to crumbling infrastructure and appalling living conditions for inmates. The decision to shut down the facility was seen by many as a long overdue response to these persistent problems, which have cast a shadow over the federal prison system and sparked widespread criticism from human rights advocates and legal experts alike. One of the most high-profile incidents that brought attention to the failings of MCC was the death of financier Jeffrey Epstein in August 2019. Epstein's death, officially ruled a suicide, exposed the severe lapses in security protocols and the overall neglect within the institution. The facility's inability to adequately monitor Epstein despite his high-risk status was emblematic of a broader failure to ensure the safety and well-being of its detainees. Reports revealed that surveillance cameras in the area were malfunctioning, and the guards on duty were found to have falsified records, leading to public outrage and demands for accountability. This tragic event underscored the urgent need for reform within the MCC and set in motion a series of investigations into the conditions at federal detention centers nationwide. As these revelations unfolded, the spotlight quickly shifted to other federal facilities, including the Metropolitan Detention Center MDC in Brooklyn. Like its counterpart in Manhattan, MDC Brooklyn has faced its own share of controversies related to inadequate living conditions, insufficient staffing, and a lack of basic resources for inmates. These systemic problems have now taken center stage in the case of a 75-year-old defendant accused of tax fraud. The debate surrounding his potential relocation to MDC Brooklyn has intensified concerns about the treatment of vulnerable inmates in federal custody. Authorities have expressed serious reservations about transferring the elderly defendant to MDC Brooklyn due to the notorious conditions at the facility. Reports suggest that if the defendant were indeed moved to MDC, his 9-month sentence could be revoked in favor of home confinement, reflecting a lack of confidence in the facility's ability to provide adequate care and safety for older inmates. This decision highlights the broader issue of how the deteriorating conditions in federal detention centers are influencing legal outcomes and judicial decisions, particularly when it comes to the incarceration of individuals who may not be able to withstand the harsh environment of these institutions. The ongoing crisis at MDC Brooklyn is not an isolated issue, but rather part of a systemic problem that plagues many federal detention centers across the country. Over the years, MDC Brooklyn has faced repeated scrutiny for its failure to meet even the most basic standards of inmate care. Complaints from inmates and their families have highlighted a range of issues, including extreme temperatures in the cells, lack of medical attention, and unsanitary conditions. During a particularly severe cold snap in 2019, for instance, inmates at MDC Brooklyn were left without heat or electricity for days, prompting protests and public outcry over the inhumane treatment they endured. These incidents illustrate a pattern of neglect that raises serious questions about the facility's ability to protect the health and safety of its detainees. The potential consequences of this crisis extend far beyond the immediate impact on individual inmates. Legal experts argue that the deteriorating conditions in facilities like MDC Brooklyn undermine the integrity of the criminal justice system as a whole. When prisons are unable to provide safe and humane conditions, it calls into question the fairness of sentencing decisions and the treatment of all individuals in the justice system. This issue is particularly pressing for older or medically vulnerable inmates, who are at greater risk of suffering due to inadequate health care, poor nutrition, and exposure to harsh environmental conditions within these facilities. The closure of the MCC and the ongoing scrutiny of MDC Brooklyn have sparked a broader conversation about the need for comprehensive reform in the federal prison system. There is growing pressure on the Federal Bureau of Prisons (BOP) to implement immediate changes that address the root causes of these problems, such as staff shortages, outdated infrastructure, and the lack of proper training for correctional officers. Advocates for prison reform are calling for increased oversight and accountability measures to ensure that these facilities meet minimum standards for the treatment of detainees. In conclusion, the challenges faced by MCC and MDC Brooklyn highlight the urgent need for a systematic overhaul of federal detention centers in the United States. The case of the 75-year-old defendant serves as a stark reminder that the consequences of neglect within these facilities are not merely hypothetical. They have real and profound impacts on the lives of those who are incarcerated. As public awareness grows and calls for reform intensify, there is hope that these critical issues will be addressed to create a more just and humane correctional system that respects the rights and dignity of all individuals in its care. Jeffrey Epstein's death in 2019 has become a significant point of reference in these conversations, marking a critical turning point for how the public and legal authorities view the treatment of detainees in federal custody. Epstein's death, officially ruled a suicide, occurred under questionable circumstances, with reports pointing to several security failures at MCC. The facility was widely criticized for its lack of proper surveillance, insufficient staffing, and unsafe environment, which were seen as contributing factors to the incident. These conditions included collapsed concrete, crumbling cells, and unbearably cold temperatures that made survival extremely difficult for those incarcerated there. The incident not only exposed the systemic failures within MCC, but also raised broader questions about the reliability and safety of federal detention centers across the country. Following Epstein's death, there was an outcry for reforms and an urgent call for the Federal Bureau of Prisons (BOP) to take immediate action to address the glaring deficiencies in its facilities. In response, the BOP has been working to implement changes aimed at improving the conditions in its institutions, including MDC Brooklyn. A spokesperson from the Federal Bureau of Prisons released a statement acknowledging the issues raised by both the judges and the broader public regarding these facilities. The statement emphasized the Bureau's commitment to resolving the concerns related to staffing shortages, inadequate training, and the overall safety of inmates in detention centers. This pledge recognizes that the criminal justice system's credibility is at risk if it cannot protect detainees' human rights and safety.